Sreeram Chaulia is also with us now. Sreeram, what according to you are the main points that India has been able to put forward? Because remember today, like Sakal and I have been discussing for a few hours now, India has clearly been able to specify that India has emerged as a global superpower on a world stage.
You know, the big takeaway for me from this morning's events, number one is Prime Minister Modi has skillfully managed multiple forums where, different types of messages and interests have to be projected. So, for example, to start with the bilateral with Trump, we are looking at some kind of a deal with him because he's been, pushing and seeking more and more concessions on trade, on Iran, on Russia, and on 5G. And on all these cases, while there are differences, it's interesting that Vijay Gokhale, our foreign secretary, mentioned that we will be open to American companies from Silicon Valley getting a share of the 5G network development in India, which means that Huawei, the Chinese company, is not likely to get it at all, or maybe actually reduced. Its role in India may be reduced, which may be good for our national security. So there are some aspects where there is still convergence between India and United States, and we'll work on it. With Japan,
yes. Sreeram, a very brief interruption here. We need to take a very short break, but on the other side, when we'll come back, we'll talk about how India has had an upper hand when it comes to maneuvering these negotiations, especially that sticky point of trade, and much more on the other side. We take a short break, viewers. Sreeram continues to be with us. Sreeram, over to you. Well, I just want to understand how you look at those overall so far, because we do have an MEA structured response as far as Trump and Modi bilateral is considered. But what's your reading? Do you see a slight toning down as far as US is considered? Contrary to the hardening of stance we saw from Trump ahead of the summit, where he called those tariff restrictions unacceptable, but it's a contrasting stance now. We have managed to tame him. Our Prime Minister has managed to tame him.
Yeah, no, Sakal, Prime Minister Modi has been a global statesman now into his 6th year. And clearly he has gained a lot of experience, and he has understood that Trump's America is different from Obama's America.
Okay.
And so he's accordingly adjusted. If you see the bilateral, he has tried to, look at specifics, and probably offer some concessions here and there without crossing the red lines where India and United States have diverging interests. On the other hand, with the Japan, India, America, India, I think he made a very important point about regional stability and Indo-Pacific. When we mention Indo-Pacific, free and open passageways and of the sea lanes, we are clearly referring to the Chinese threat in the region of Chinese hegemony, where we have something in common with Japan and with the United States. So we should be working on those lines as well. At the same time, with the RIC, Russia, India, China, and with the BRICS, the Prime Minister did criticize the US. He spoke about unilateralism and threat of sanctions.
That's a strong word.
Yeah, protectionism. I think he has, when it comes to holding on to our core interests,
okay,
if Trump says America first, Modi says India first.
Yes,
So there are some points on which we are not going to appease them. We are telling them, look, here is a big democratic country with a resounding victory. Prime Minister's come back, with a huge margin, and he's actually strutting on the world stage as a global statesman. In fact, Trump is in a way isolated right now. So we are looking at points of convergence, but also where we have to say no, we are drawing the line in the sand. At the same time, I think the issue of 5G, Trump has been pushing that, and that's interesting because Vijay Gokhale also mentioned it. We may be willing to let Intel or HP or some other American companies to come in and maybe balance out Huawei, which is a Chinese company. On defense, I think Trump wants more and more sales for American companies. And in fact, I think Prime Minister has read Trump correctly, because initially the thinking was that US foreign policy is going to continue as it was under Obama. Rather, what has happened is very transactional, very conditional.
Or shall I put it this way, has Trump also read Prime Minister Modi correctly, because he's somewhere down the line reconciled to the fact that there are not going to really any major concessions coming his way.
That's right, Sakal.
Because repeatedly he's talking about positive meeting, he's talking about congratulating him, and multiple times, and then he's also saying that the India-US relationships have never been better ever before. That's a loaded statement.
No, that's right, Sakala. In fact, Trump has adjusted to the reality. There's a lot of rhetoric and coming from him, especially through Twitter. But then the reality is, Trump said on Iran, things will play out and we are not in a hurry. And that's important because Prime Minister emphasized the need for stability in the Middle East. We don't want a US-Iran full-blown war. because that will hurt our energy security, our oil supplies, our investment in Chabahar, and I think Iran, the threat of American sanctions or further restrictions on India doing business with Iran, I think that is going to subside over time, because although Iran is hot with the US, I think the collective will of the G20, including India, is that we don't want this to blow beyond proportion and become a major crisis, because the Straits of Hormuz, through which world's energy supply, especially Japan, China, India, Korea, all of us are dependent on stability in that region, and we don't want the US to play a spoil sport there. So to some extent, when Trump says, and in fact S-400 was not even mentioned, so that's a good news for us, because we don't want America's the threat of sanctions on India hanging over our neck like this. And to an extent, by holding steadfast, by showing strategic patience and resilience, what we are telling the Americans is, look, we have a good thing going, don't spoil it by imposing unreasonable restrictions and conditions.
Sreeram, we're also saying that Donald Trump is speaking about 5G yet again, something that India has clearly spoken earlier about. And Prime Minister Modi conveyed that we are going to be a billion 5G user and the second largest market, which will drive global trends. In fact, when Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale spoke about it, we were clear when we spoke about 5G, but yet again, he seems to be very clear when Donald Trump is speaking that he wants 5G to go a certain way only for the American markets. The bigger point here, America is going only by the markets that it wants to go by. India, on the other hand, has spoken about peace. India has spoken about terrorism. That is not only impacting India, but it's also impacting Sri Lanka and Maldives. So it's taking on the global foray here. What's your viewpoint about how India is putting itself forward, not only when it comes to terrorism, but also the new India pitch that Prime Minister Modi as a global leader has put forward?
The new India under Prime Minister Modi began 2014. The agenda is very clear. We want to be a net provider of security and prosperity to Asia and to the world at large. And today we are seeing that Prime Minister is, proposing and, arguing constructively for global governance, which has been missing. There is a crisis of multilateralism right now in the world, especially because of Trump, but also some other protectionist measures by the Europeans. And India is in many ways taking the lead and saying, look, this is a world order that we don't want to completely overthrow. We want reform. Prime Minister mentioned reformed multilateralism. That's a very important concept for the viewers, because that is our key phrase here. We want changes in the global financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, in the United Nations Security Council, in the WTO. We are in favor of reform. We want a bigger voice for developing countries. Today, Prime Minister Modi is speaking on behalf of many large developing countries and small ones too, which feel that they have been left out of the global governance structure. So today, we are actually taking a leadership mantle. Our slogan, Global Leader Modi on Republic TV, is absolutely accurate, because what we are seeing is when Trump has become a troublemaker or an outlier, Modi is in the mainstream, and Modi in many ways, I think people are looking up to him because he has come back with a strong mandate. Remember, in international politics, stability and strength at home in domestic politics matters a lot. People have observed that Prime Minister got re-elected with a massive majority.
Yeah.
And people are respecting that. Every world leader he met today in Japan is congratulating him for the victory. It was a fair, square victory.
And we want to know now for Indians to really understand the significance of this entire narrative of counter-terror cooperation when it comes to one of the most powerful international groupings, and that is G20. Do you think Pakistan specifically must have figured out between the two leaders? Because this is very essential to note here. Post-Pulwama, Pakistan stands isolated. We have seen the kind of statements are coming from FATF. We have seen what's really the fate of Pakistan when it comes to SARC grouping, although there is no direct ramification when it comes to G20. But today, terror topped the agenda. When Prime Minister had a bilateral with Trump, do you think that must have come up?
Absolutely, Sakal. Off the record, behind cameras, definitely. I think Prime Minister is saying that we need to push ahead with the Global Convention Against Terrorism. We have been proposing that in the UN for a long time. And I think the fact that, no matter how distasteful Trump is on issues of trade and other things with us, on Pakistan there is some degree of convergence, because that's where Trump has been tightening the screws on them. He has completely cut off all military aid to that country, and they are behind the scenes maneuvering the IMF bailout as well with conditionalities. The US has said if Pakistan is going to repay China with IMF bailout, that's unacceptable to them. So essentially the US is trying to divide Pakistan and China, which are closely interlinked strategically,
through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and the Belt and Road Initiative. So what we are seeing is, hopefully more squeeze on Pakistan through these measures, even at the broader G20 level, as well as individually with the country's Prime Minister is going to mention this. He's going to emphasize the cross-border terrorism issue. Even at the BRICS forum, there is some degree of consensus. Russia is with us on this, although the Chinese always try to play a kind of a middle game between India and Pakistan.
Oh yes, absolutely. Let's also, viewers, tell you that when Prime Minister Modi had the bilateral talk with President Donald Trump of the United States, it was clear that it was a meeting that went forward. It was not 30 minutes as was slotted, but it moved to a 40-minute meeting. It overshot the time, but also Prime Minister Modi listed out the concerns that they had. Whatever President Donald Trump said, the point is clearly put forward by Prime Minister Modi about the agendas they want to place forward.
Okay, before we take a break, Sreeram, a quick one on this Donald Trump sounding extremely critical of China and India, especially the kind of statement that he has made on the digital localization, shared safety and prosperity. We must ensure resilience and security of our 5G networks. That's a specific point that he has made. He has opposed data localization and policies which have been used to restrict digital trade and violate privacy and intellectual property protection. So basically the whole protectionist approach that you were talking earlier. Now I think he's making his position very clear, perhaps his displeasure very clear on 5G.
Yeah, Sakal, Trump is the ultimate salesman of American corporations. And what he wants is Walmart, Amazon, all the big e-commerce companies and the Google, Facebook, Twitter, all of them to basically have business in the large Indian market, growing Indian market. And what he's saying, they want the servers and the data to be in the US so that it's easier for these companies. But on the other hand, we have our own sovereignty issues, we have our own national security concerns. The Americans have been spying left, right and center through their corporations on the whole world. So I think, the Ambanis in India have been saying that we must have data localization. So there is an issue here. And I think what they want is on e-commerce and data localization, apart from trade, there is a divergence. But I think we can find common ground. The fact is, Amazon makes tons of money in India and it's growing. And so they cannot be complaining like this for minor things.
Absolutely.
If they look at the big picture, India is the great opportunity. Remember, Prime Minister Sakal always used to say 3 Ds, demography, democracy and demand. This is what brings the whole world to India. So at the end of the day, US corporations are still benefiting. They are investing heavily. Their trade, bilateral trade has been going up, even though Trump has thrown some spanners. So if you look at the big picture, I think Prime Minister will definitely, he has the sagacity to show Trump, look, India is your greatest opportunity where your companies can grow, because the Chinese have walled them off completely. And China is the other big market. So India is the only alternative, and they have to make some concessions to us. It cannot be a one-way street.
Absolutely. And those concessions must be given with a global leader like Modi at the world stage at the G20 summit. This is what we are looking at.
Let me quickly take this question to Sreeram Chaulia, Global Affairs expert in our Delhi studio. How much ground have we really covered? Because we know that this was the most anticipated meeting, Sreeram, the most anticipated meeting, considering the kind of dispute or difference of opinion, or perhaps both sides were not really aligned when it comes to the trade tariff issue. Do you think now the strain thing between the two on trade tariff is perhaps the thing of past, and both sides have made an attempt to move forward? I'm specifically talking about Modi-Trump.
Yeah, Sakal, I think we have covered some ground. The thing with dealing with Trump, I think Modi has learnt, with past experience, is put something specific on the table rather than broad principles. So therefore, they went into nitty-gritty quite a bit. And it's interesting that the 5G opportunity for US companies was mentioned. There was also the talk about Iran, and and Trump seems to have given some kind of assurance that it will not go to war with Iran. I think he doesn't want it himself, although some hawks in the US establishment are pushing for war with Iran. So overall, I think we have conveyed our concerns. Defense industrial security pact is being signed between the two countries, and that will help co-production and manufacturing of defense, because Prime Minister has very clearly mentioned Make in India is a major priority for us. He's been saying that even here, and we expect the US companies to come and manufacture here rather than for us to be just a buyer of American technology. Trump is a salesman. He wants to keep pushing stuff for us to buy, but PM is saying, look, we want to co-produce and then export to third countries. And that so far has been missing. With Russia, we've done very well. Today we have Russia-India China trilateral as well. And Russia is the model in that sense because we have co-produced quite a bit with them. And the Americans are behind on that point, even though their defense sales are increasing. So trade, the strains remain, Sakal, but I would say on defense cooperation, there is a lot to be achieved and to go ahead. The sanctions on, threatened sanctions by Trump, so administration on India, I think for the moment are behind us. So to some extent, I think we have covered some gaps, but remember, even at the BRICS informal setting, Sakal, there was a pushback from Prime Minister on some issues on which we have conflict of interest with the US. So it's a complex world. Today at G20, Sakal, we are seeing a variety of positions being enunciated by Prime Minister, all with the single mantra of India first and, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. But red lines where India cannot make concessions beyond a point to unreasonable demands by the US or any other power.
Yes, no concessions, no negotiations, no compromise when it comes to national interest. Well, that's what the Indian dispensation, that's what the position perhaps has been even ahead of this summit and ahead of this very important bilateral between Trump and Modi.